My Grandpa Rowan, never raised his voice. Not even when Marcia Crowell's black Mercedes SUV smashed through his ranch gate for the third time that month. I was visiting from the city when it all started, and his calm unnerved me. Marcia was the president of the new HOA next door, and she'd convinced herself that Grandpa's dirt road was some kind of historic public right-of-way. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't offer compensation. She just kept driving through like the gate was hers to break. But Grandpa wasn't the type to back down, and he wasn't the type to throw punches either. He had a different kind of plan. And if you're watching this from anywhere, you're about to see how a man in his 60s taught an HOA president that boundaries aren't suggestions. They're the law. The gate stood where it always had, about 50 yards from Grandpa's front porch, wrought iron, painted black, with a simple latch and a sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." It had been there since 1987, when Grandpa replaced the old wooden one. That gate wasn't just metal and hinges. It was a line. And on that bright Tuesday morning in early March, Marcia Crowell crossed it without asking. I was sitting on the porch with Grandpa when her Mercedes SUV appeared at the end of the dirt road. The engine sound came first, a low growl that didn't belong out here. Then the dust cloud. Grandpa didn't move. He just sipped his black coffee and watched. The SUV slowed as it approached the gate, and for a second I thought she might stop. She didn't. The gate swung open under the pressure of her bumper, metal scraping against metal, and she rolled through like she owned the place. Grandpa set his coffee down on the porch rail. His hand was steady, but I saw his jaw tighten. She parked about 10 feet inside the property line and stepped out. Blonde hair pulled back tight, white blazer, heels that had no business on a ranch. She looked around like she was inspecting real estate, then walked toward us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Price?" she called out, her voice smooth and practiced. "I'm Marcia Crowell, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I'm sure you've seen the new development going up next door." Grandpa nodded, but didn't say anything. She took that as permission to keep talking. "We're exploring options for improved traffic flow in the community, and this road of yours appears to be the most logical route for connecting our residential area to the public park on the other side. I wanted to introduce myself and let you know we'll be looking into the historical usage rights for this access point." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't asking. She was informing. Grandpa finally spoke, his voice calm and even. "Miss Crowell, this is private land. Has been in my family since 1965. That road only serves this ranch. There's no public access. Never has been." Marcia's smile tightened a fraction. "I understand your perspective, Mr. Price, but our attorney is researching records from the 1960s that suggest this route may have been used by the public historically. We believe there's a legal basis for an easement. You'll be receiving formal correspondence soon." She handed him a business card, turned on her heel, and walked back to her SUV. She didn't close the gate behind her. After she left, Grandpa stood there for a long moment, looking at the bent latch where her bumper had pushed through. He didn't curse or kick the dirt. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the gate, then zoomed in on her license plate from the shot he'd taken when she first arrived, 7KLM 394. He wrote it down in a small notebook he kept in his shirt pocket, the same one where he tracked feed orders and vet appointments. His legal mind was already working. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" I asked. He looked at me with those steady gray eyes. "I've worked at the county clerk's office for 20 years, son. I know what a boundary is, and I know what happens when you let someone take the first inch." That afternoon, Grandpa drove into town. I stayed behind to fix the gate latch, which took longer than I expected. When he came back 3 hours later, he had a manila folder tucked under his arm. He spread the documents out on the kitchen table like he was assembling evidence for a trial. Survey map from 1987, showing the exact property lines. The original deed, signed by his father in 1965. He tapped the survey map with one calloused finger. "This line right here, that's where my land ends and the world begins. She can say whatever she wants about historical access, but the county has no record of it. None." I looked at the stack of papers and felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about a gate or a road. It was about a man defending something that belonged to him, something he'd earned and maintained for decades. Grandpa wasn't going to yell or threaten. He was going to do what he'd always done: follow the rules, keep records, stand his ground. "What do you think she'll do next?" I asked. He closed the folder and looked out the window toward the gate. His strategic mind had already mapped it out. "She'll come back. People like that always do. They test you to see if you'll bend. But I won't. And when she pushes too far, I'll be ready." That evening, an email arrived. Grandpa read it on his old desktop computer, the blue light reflecting off his reading glasses. It was from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA attorney, a man named Douglas Pratt. The subject line read, "Notice of potential easement claim." The email was polite, but firm, suggesting that Grandpa and the HOA board engage in good faith discussions about shared access to the ranch road. It mentioned historical usage, community benefit, and legal options if an agreement couldn't be reached. Grandpa didn't flinch. He printed it out, 3-hole punched it, and added it to a new binder he labeled Boundary Defense. His emotional restraint was something I'd always admired, the way he could face pressure without cracking. He wrote the date on the first page, March 7th, Violation 1, trespassing without permission, gate damaged, notice of intent received. I watched him work, methodical and unhurried, and I realized something. Marcia Crowell thought she was dealing with an old man who would cave under pressure. She had no idea who she was up against. Grandpa Rowan wasn't just some rancher. He understood land law better than most attorneys. He knew how to document everything, how to build a case one piece of evidence at a time, and most importantly, he knew that the law was on his side. He just had to prove it. Before I left that night to drive back to the city, he walked me out to my car. The gate was fixed, the latch solid again. "You think she'll actually try to take your land?" I asked. He shook his head. "She won't take it, but she'll try to use it. And when she does, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person ignores a boundary." Chapter 2, The Survey. 4 days passed without incident. I'd gone back to the city for work, but Grandpa and I talked every evening. He told me about the new calves, the fence repair he'd been putting off, the way the spring grass was coming in early. He didn't mention Marcia. I should have known that meant something. On Saturday morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. "They're here," Grandpa said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it I recognized. 3 of them, on my land, surveying. I was out of bed before he finished the sentence. "Did you call the sheriff?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "I'm walking out there now. Just wanted someone to know, in case this goes sideways." He hung up before I could argue. Grandpa stepped off the porch and walked toward the 3 figures standing about 50 feet past his gate. They had equipment. A man in a reflective vest held a GPS unit on a tripod. Another man, younger, carried a tablet and stylus. And there was Marcia, dressed in jeans and a crisp button-down, pointing toward the far end of the property like she was giving directions. They didn't see him approach at first. When they did, the younger man looked nervous. Marcia did not. "Morning," Grandpa said. His tone was conversational, almost friendly. "Can I ask what you folks are doing on my land?" The man with the GPS straightened up. He had contractor written all over him, someone hired to do a job without asking too many questions. "We're just taking some measurements," he said, "for a traffic study." Grandpa nodded slowly. "And who hired you to take measurements on private property?" The man glanced at Marcia. She stepped forward, that same practiced smile in place. "Mr. Price, our attorney recommended we gather accurate data before moving forward with the legal process. We're simply documenting the existing roadway for our records." Grandpa's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "You didn't ask my permission. You're trespassing." Marcia's smile didn't falter. "We have a good faith belief that this area may fall under historic public access. Our lawyer advised us that preliminary surveying is within our rights." It was a lie, and Grandpa knew it. So did she, but she delivered it with such confidence that the 2 men with her seemed to believe it. Grandpa pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff," he said. Marcia shrugged. "That's your choice, but we're not doing anything illegal." Deputy Mason Briggs arrived 20 minutes later. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of seriousness that comes from wanting to do the job right. Grandpa had known his father. The deputy looked at the equipment, looked at Marcia, and then pulled out his own notepad. "Miss Crowell, Mr. Price says you're on his land without permission. That's trespassing." Marcia's tone shifted, just slightly. Softer now. Reasonable. "Deputy, we're simply gathering data for a legal claim. Our attorney assured us this was permissible as part of the discovery process." Deputy Briggs shook his head. "Discovery happens after a lawsuit is filed. Ma'am, right now, this is private property, and Mr. Price is asking you to leave." He turned to the two contractors. "Do either of you have written permission from the landowner to be here?" The man with the Jeep looked uncomfortable. "We were hired by the HOA. They said it was cleared." The deputy wrote something down. "It's not. I'm issuing a verbal warning. If any of you come back onto this property without Mr. Price's explicit permission, I'll file trespassing charges." Stanley Brewer, the younger man with the tablet, finally spoke up. He had a soft voice, hesitant. "Marcia, maybe we should check the county records first, like Mr. Price suggested at the meeting." Marcia turned to him, and for just a second, her mask slipped. Her eyes went cold. "Stanley, I've already consulted with our attorney. We're proceeding as planned." Stanley looked down at his tablet and didn't say anything else. But Grandpa saw it. The doubt. The crack in the unified front. After they left, Deputy Briggs stayed behind for a few minutes. He leaned against his patrol car, arms crossed. "Mr. Price, I've seen this kind of thing before. HOAs that think they can push people around. You've got the law on your side, but that doesn't mean it'll be easy." Grandpa nodded. "I know, but I'm not backing down." The deputy smiled. "Just a little." "Good. Keep documenting everything. Photos, dates, times. If she comes back, call me immediately. I'll make sure there's a record." That afternoon, Grandpa installed a security camera at the gate. Nothing fancy, just a basic outdoor unit he picked up at the hardware store for $80. He mounted it on a post with a clear view of the entrance and synced it to his phone. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and updated his binder. March 11th, Violation 2, unauthorized surveying. 3 individuals. Deputy Briggs issued verbal warning. Photographs taken. Camera installed. He underlined the last line twice. That night, I called him. "You okay?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm fine, son. But Stanley, that young man with them, he looked uneasy. I think he's starting to realize Marcia's leading them into something they can't win." I heard the faint clink of his coffee mug on the table. "People follow strong personalities," he continued, "even when those personalities are wrong. But sooner or later, the truth gets louder than the lies. And when it does, I'll be ready." The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Grandpa called me at work, and I could hear the rustle of paper through the phone. "They're threatening to sue," he said. No anger in his voice, just facts. "The HOA attorney sent a demand letter. They're giving me 10 days to grant them access, or they'll file in county court." I felt my stomach tighten. "Can they do that?" Grandpa was quiet for a second. "They can file anything they want. Doesn't mean they'll win, but it'll cost me time and money either way." That evening, Grandpa drove to the sheriff's office. He brought the demand letter, the photos from both incidents, and his binder of documentation. Deputy Briggs met him in the lobby and walked him back to a small conference room. Sheriff Alden Brooks was waiting there, a man in his mid-50s with gray at his temples and the kind of steady presence that came from 3 decades of law enforcement. He read through Grandpa's documents without speaking, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Price," the sheriff finally said, "you've done everything right. You've documented the violations. You've asked them to leave. And you've called us, each time. But I need to be straight with you. This is heading toward civil court. If they file a lawsuit claiming historic easement rights, we can't intervene in that. That's between you, them, and a judge." Grandpa nodded. "I understand. But if they keep trespassing while the case is pending, that's still criminal, right?" Sheriff Brooks smiled slightly. "Yes, it is. And if they do, we'll handle it. But my advice, get your own attorney. Make sure your property lines are rock solid, and keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document everything. Grandpa left the sheriff's office with a clearer picture of what he was up against. This wasn't just about Marcia anymore. It was about a system, an HOA with resources and a lawyer on retainer, pressing against a single man defending his land. But Grandpa had something they didn't. He had the truth, and he knew how to prove it. 2 days later, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA held their monthly meeting. It was open to the public, as required by Texas law. So Grandpa went. I drove down from the city to go with him. The community center was small, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, folding chairs arranged in neat rows. About 15 people were there, most of them homeowners from the development. Marcia sat at the front table with Stanley Brewer on her left and another board member, a woman in her 50s, on her right. Norman Hale, a neighbor Grandpa knew from the feed store, sat in the third row. He gave Grandpa a small nod when we walked in. Marcia called the meeting to order and moved through the agenda quickly. Landscaping budget, pool maintenance, parking enforcement. Then, she got to new business. As many of you know, she said, her tone measured and professional, the board has been exploring options to improve traffic flow and access to the public park east of our development. We've identified a private road adjacent to our community that we believe may qualify as a historic right-of-way. Our legal team is currently researching the matter, and we're optimistic about securing access for all residents. Grandpa raised his hand. Marcia paused, and I saw the flicker of annoyance cross her face before she smoothed it over. Yes, Mr. Price. He stood, his voice calm and clear. That private road you're referring to is my land. It's been in my family since 1965. I've checked the county records myself. There is no easement, historic or otherwise. There's no record of public use. And I've asked your board, twice now, to stop trespassing. The room went quiet. A few people shifted in their seats. Stanley Brewer looked down at his hands. Marcia's smile stayed in place, but her eyes were cold. Mr. Price, I appreciate your perspective, but our attorney has found documentation suggesting otherwise. We believe there's a legitimate legal basis for our claim, and we intend to pursue it through the proper channels. Grandpa didn't sit down. Then I'd like to see that documentation, because the county clerk's office, where I've worked for 2 decades, has no record of it. If your attorney has something the county doesn't, I'd be very interested to know where it came from. A man in the back row spoke up, his voice uncertain. Wait, so we don't actually have legal access yet? Marcia turned to him, her tone patient but firm. We're in the process of establishing it. These things take time, but we're confident in our position. Norman Hale raised his hand. Marcia, if Mr. Price is right and there's no easement, doesn't that mean we're trespassing? Marcia's jaw tightened. Norman, we're acting on the advice of legal counsel. I'd ask that everyone trust the process. Stanley Brewer finally spoke, his voice quiet but audible. Maybe we should verify the records ourselves before we go further. I mean, if Mr. Price has been to the county office and there's nothing there, shouldn't we check that first? Marcia turned to him, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Stanley, we've already discussed this with the attorney. We're not going to second-guess professional legal advice based on one man's objections. But the damage was done. I could see it in the faces around the room. Doubt had crept in. After the meeting, Norman Hale caught up with us in the parking lot. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, retired military. Rowan, he said, keeping his voice low. I don't think Marcia's being straight with us. I'm going to check the county records myself. If you're right, and I think you are, a lot of folks in there are going to be real unhappy with how this was handled. Grandpa shook his hand. I appreciate that. Norman, all I want is for people to respect the boundary. That's it. On the drive home, I asked Grandpa what he thought would happen next. He stared out at the dark road ahead, his hand steady on the wheel. She's going to push harder, he said. She's in too deep now. If she backs down, she loses face in front of the whole community. So she'll double down. And when she does, I'll be ready. I believed him, because Grandpa Rowan wasn't just defending a piece of land. He was defending a principle, and he'd do it the right way, no matter how hard they pushed. The call came on a Saturday morning, 9 days after the HOA meeting. I'd driven down to spend the weekend with Grandpa, help him with some fence repairs. We were in the barn when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his expression hardened. "Camera alert," he said. "Someone's at the gate." We walked outside and he pulled up the feed on his phone. 5 vehicles were lined up on the dirt road leading to his property. Marcia's black Mercedes in front, followed by Stanley's truck, Norman's sedan, and 2 others I didn't recognize. Grandpa stood on the porch, arms crossed, and waited. The caravan moved slowly through the open gate, 1 vehicle at a time. Not speeding, not aggressive, just deliberate. They rolled past the house at maybe 10 miles an hour, windows down, heads turning to look at the fence lines, the outbuildings, the condition of the road itself. Marcia was in the lead, her hand visible through the windshield holding up a phone, taking photos or video. It was an inspection, a show of presence, a message that said, "We're not afraid of you." And the last vehicle, a Jeep Wrangler, veered slightly to avoid a pothole and clipped the edge of a puddle near the chicken coop. Mud and standing water sprayed across the wire fencing. The chickens inside a bimo erupted in panicked squawking, wings beating against the mesh. Grandpa's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. The Jeep kept going, following the others down the road toward the back fence line where the property bordered the park access Marcia wanted. They turned around there, looped back, and exited the way they'd come. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. After they left, Grandpa walked over to the coop. I followed. The chickens had mostly settled, but one of the older hens, a 12-year-old speckled gray named Dottie, was lying motionless in the corner. Grandpa knelt down and gently picked her up. Her body was still warm, but limp. No blood, no visible injury, just shock. Old birds didn't handle stress well. He wrapped her in a feed sack and carried her to the barn without saying a word. We buried her under the oak tree where he'd buried the others over the years. He didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just patted the soil flat with the back of his shovel and stood there for a minute, looking at the small grave. "That's it," he said quietly. "I'm done asking them to stop." I'd never heard that tone from him before. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, something final. He walked back to the house, pulled up the camera footage, and saved the entire sequence to 3 different drives. Then he got in his truck. "Where are you going?" I asked. He looked at me through the open window. "To have a conversation." Grandpa drove to Meadowbrook Estates, the new development where Marcia lived. The houses were all identical, 2-story colonials with manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. He found her address from the HOA meeting roster and parked in front of her house. She answered the door in yoga pants and a sweatshirt, clearly not expecting company. Her expression went from surprise to guarded in less than a second. "Mr. Price," she said. "What can I do for you?" Grandpa's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Miss Crowell, your caravan went through my property this morning, uninvited. One of your vehicles spooked my chickens badly enough that one of them died. I'm here to ask you, one more time, to stop." Marcia tilted her head slightly, and I could almost see her calculating. "I'm very sorry to hear about your chicken, Mr. Price, but we were simply conducting a site visit to gather information for our legal case. We have every right to document the condition of a roadway we believe is subject to public access." Grandpa took a slow breath. "There is no public access. I've shown you the county records. I've explained the law. You know you're trespassing, and you're doing it anyway." Marcia's expression didn't change. "That's a matter for the courts to decide. Our attorney has advised us that preliminary investigation is within our rights. If you disagree, you're welcome to pursue legal action. But we're going to continue doing what's necessary to protect the interests of our community." Grandpa stared at her for a long moment. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just held his gaze with that same calm certainty. Finally, he nodded once. "All right then," he said. "I tried to do this the polite way." He turned and walked back to his truck. Marcia watched from the doorway until he drove away. On the drive back to the ranch, Grandpa didn't say much. I could see his mind working. That same focused intensity I'd seen when he was solving problems at the clerk's office. When we got home, he went straight to his computer. I watched over his shoulder as he searched. Texas property law, legal barriers, trespassing prevention, trench excavation, liability and warning signs. He clicked through page after page, taking notes in his binder. Then he pulled up the county building code database and searched for excavation permits. He didn't need one for work on his own land, as long as he wasn't violating setbacks or utility easements. That evening, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to the county utilities office, asking about underground line locations. The woman on the phone, Joanna Winslet, knew him by name. "Rowan, you planning some kind of project?" she asked. "Just want to make sure I don't hit anything I shouldn't," he said. She pulled up his parcel number and confirmed there were no water, gas, or electric lines within 50 feet of his main access road. "You're clear," she said. "But you should still call 811 before you dig, just to be safe." His second call was to Deputy Briggs. "I want to make sure I'm within my rights here," Grandpa said. "If I dig a trench on my own property to prevent vehicles from driving through, is that legal?" There was a pause. "As long as it's on your land and you post proper warnings. Yes, but Mr. Price, if someone gets hurt, there's going to be questions." Grandpa's voice was steady. "I'll make sure the warnings are clear. Very clear." After he hung up, he sat at the kitchen table with his map spread out in front of him. He marked a line across the road, about 100 feet past the gate, deep enough to stop a vehicle, wide enough that no one could drive around it. And he'd put up signs. Big ones. Impossible to miss. "You're really going to do this?" I said. It wasn't a question. He looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not fear, just an absolute, unshakable resolve. "I gave her every chance," he said. "Now she's going to learn what a boundary really means." The next morning, Grandpa was up before dawn. I found him at the kitchen table with a hand-drawn diagram of the property, measuring tape marks and calculations scribbled in the margins. He'd marked a spot about 100 feet past the main gate, where the road narrowed between 2 old fence posts. "This is where it needs to be," he said, tapping the paper with his pen. "Close enough to the entrance that they'll see the warning signs. Far enough that it's clearly defensive, not a trap." After breakfast, we drove into town. First stop was the county utilities office, a low brick building next to the courthouse. Joanna Winslet was at the front desk, sorting through a stack of plat maps. She smiled when she saw Grandpa. "Rowan, twice in 1 week. You building something out there?" He shook his head. "Just want to make absolutely sure I'm not going to hit any lines. Can you print me a utility map for my parcel?" She pulled it up on her computer, and we watched as the printer spat out a large format sheet showing water, electric, gas, and fiber optic lines. The main road through Grandpa's property was clean. No utilities within 30 feet on either side. Grandpa asked her to sign and date the printout as an official county document. She raised an eyebrow, but did it anyway. "You're being awfully careful," she said. "That's because I'm doing this right," he replied. Before we left, he made one more request. "Can you note in your system that I requested this map? Today, I want a record." Joanna typed something into her computer. "Done. You're covered. Rowan, just make sure you call 811 before you start digging." We walked 2 blocks to the hardware store. Grandpa had a list. 50 wooden posts, 4x4, 8 feet long, a roll of heavy chain, 2 large metal signs, the kind used for construction warnings, reflective orange paint, a box of lag bolts. The kid at the checkout, maybe 19, looked at the order and whistled. "You building a fort, Mr. Price?" Grandpa just smiled. "Something like that." The total came to just under $400. He paid in cash and arranged for delivery that afternoon. Back at the ranch, Grandpa made the call to 811. It took less than 5 minutes. The operator asked for his address, confirmed the work location, and scheduled a technician to come out within 48 hours to mark any underground utilities. "Even though there aren't any," Grandpa said after he hung up, "I'm making sure there's a paper trail. Every step documented. Every regulation followed." The utility marker showed up Monday morning. A young guy in a reflective vest with a cart full of colored flags and spray paint. He walked the property with a handheld locator, sweeping it back and forth over the ground. After 20 minutes, he came back to where Grandpa and I were waiting. "You're clear," he said. "No active lines in your dig zone. I'm marking the perimeter anyway, just for your records." He sprayed bright orange X marks on the ground at each corner of the area. Before he left, Grandpa asked him to sign a confirmation sheet. The technician shrugged and scribbled his name. "You're thorough," he said. "That's the idea," Grandpa replied. That afternoon, the lumber and supplies arrived. We spent the rest of the day unloading and organizing everything near the dig site. Grandpa worked methodically, laying out the posts in a line, checking measurements twice, making sure everything was square. He didn't rush, didn't cut corners. Every action was deliberate. Tuesday morning, the excavator arrived. Grandpa had rented a small one, a bobcat with a narrow bucket, from a local equipment company. The operator, a weathered man in his 50s named Ray, helped Grandpa mark the trench line with stakes and string. "You want this 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide?" Ray asked. Grandpa nodded. "And I want the dirt piled on the far side, away from the road. Clean edges." Ray climbed into the machine and fired it up. The diesel engine roared to life, and the bucket bit into the earth. It took most of the day. The trench stretched 20 feet across the road, deep enough that no vehicle could cross without serious damage. Ray smoothed the edges and piled the excavated dirt in a neat berm on the property side. When he finished, he shut down the machine and wiped his forehead. "That'll stop anything short of a tank," he said. Grandpa walked the length of the trench, inspecting the depth and width. Satisfied, he shook Ray's hand and paid him in cash. Next came the warning signs. Grandpa mounted 2 of them on the wooden posts, one on each side of the road, exactly 50 feet before the trench. They were impossible to miss. Bright orange, 3 feet by 4 feet, with bold black letters. "Danger! Trench ahead. Private property. No trespassing." He added a third, smaller sign directly at the trench edge. "Road closed. Violators will be prosecuted." Then he installed the cameras. 2 of them, high definition, solar-powered. The first was mounted on a post with a wide-angle view, capturing the entire approach from the gate to the trench. The second was positioned lower, zoomed in on the area just before the trench, focused on where a driver's face would be visible through the windshield. He synced both cameras to his phone and tested them. The feeds were crystal clear, even in low light. He set them to record continuously and save to cloud storage. The last step was the email. Grandpa sat down at his computer and drafted a message to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, copying Deputy Briggs and Sheriff Brooks. The subject line read, "Notice of Boundary Protection Measures." The body was short and factual. He explained that he had installed a trench on his private property to prevent further unauthorized vehicle access. He noted that warning signs had been posted 50 feet in advance, in compliance with all local safety regulations. He included photos of the signs, the trench, and the utility clearance documents. He ended with a single sentence. "Any further trespassing will be reported to law enforcement and prosecuted to the full extent of the law." He read it over twice, then hit send. Within an hour, a reply came back. It was from Marcia, not the HOA's attorney. "Mr. Price, your obstruction of what we believe to be a public access route is noted. We will continue to exercise our rights. If any damage occurs to HOA member vehicles, you will be held liable." Grandpa printed the email, hole punched it, and added it to his binder. He didn't reply. That evening, we sat on the porch and looked out toward the gate. The trench wasn't visible from the house, but I knew it was there, waiting. "You think she'll actually try to drive through?" I asked. Grandpa sipped his coffee. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. "She's convinced herself she's right," he said. "And people like that don't stop until reality forces them to. I gave her every warning, every chance to walk away. Now it's up to her." I thought about the signs, the cameras, the documentation. Grandpa had built something more than a trench. He'd built an airtight legal defense. If Marcia drove through those warnings, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be a choice. And that choice would be on camera, time-stamped, and undeniable. "You really think this is going to work?" I asked. He looked at me, his face calm but certain. "It's not about what I think. It's about what's right. I have a boundary. I have the law. And I have the patience to see this through." He paused, then added, "She doesn't. And 2 days later, on a Saturday morning just after 9 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Grandpa. 3 words. It's happening. Come. I was already in my car, 15 minutes away, coming down for the weekend. I pushed the accelerator and made it in 10. When I pulled up to the ranch, I saw them immediately. A small crowd had gathered near the gate, maybe a dozen people, some standing by their cars, others walking up the road on foot. I parked and jogged toward Grandpa's porch. He was sitting in his usual chair, phone in hand, watching the camera feeds. His face was calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. She just went through, he said quietly. Didn't slow down, didn't stop. Drove right past both warning signs. I looked at his phone screen. The camera footage showed Marcia's black Mercedes approaching the first sign at maybe 20 miles an hour. The orange warning was huge, reflective, impossible to miss. The timestamp in the corner read 9:03 a.m. Marcia's face was visible through the windshield, her expression set and determined. She didn't brake, didn't hesitate. The SUV passed the first sign, then the second, 50 feet later. And then, just as the nose of the Mercedes crossed over the edge of the trench, everything changed. The front wheels dropped. The whole vehicle pitched forward at a steep angle, the undercarriage slamming into the far edge of the trench with a metallic crunch that echoed across the property. The rear wheels lifted off the ground for a second before settling back down. The airbags deployed with a muffled bang, white powder blooming inside the cabin. The engine revved once, then died. Dust rose in a cloud around the vehicle. And then, silence. Grandpa was already on his phone, calling 911. His voice was steady as he gave the dispatcher the address and details. Single vehicle accident on my property. Driver went through warning signs and into a marked trench. No visible injuries, but airbags deployed. Send an ambulance and sheriff's deputy. He hung up and looked at me. Come on, we need to check on her. We walked down the road together. By the time we got there, Marcia was crawling out through the passenger door. The driver's side was wedged too close to the trench wall to open. Her face was pale, streaked with airbag powder. Her hands were shaking as she braced herself against the car. She looked up and saw Grandpa, and something in her eyes shifted from shock to fury. "You did this," she said, her voice hoarse. "You deliberately tried to hurt me." Grandpa shook his head. "I posted warning signs 50 feet back. Miss Crowell, 2 of them. You drove past both." He gestured toward the first orange sign, still clearly visible from where we stood. Marcia's jaw clenched. "This is entrapment. You built a trap because you knew I'd come through." Her voice was rising now, but there was something brittle underneath the anger. "I told you to stop," Grandpa said quietly. "I sent you an email with photos of the trench and the signs. I gave you every warning I could. You chose to ignore them." By now, the crowd from the gate had walked up. I recognized Norman Hale, the retired military neighbor. Stanley Brewer was there too, his face tight with worry. A few other HOA members I'd seen at the meeting, and others, people from nearby properties who'd heard the noise or seen the commotion. Norman reached the Mercedes first. He looked at the trench, looked at the warning signs, and let out a low whistle. "Marcia," he said carefully, "those signs are pretty clear." Stanley approached from the other side, his phone out, filming. Not Marcia, but the scene, the trench, the signs, the distance between them and the vehicle. "Marcia," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You told us the road was safe. You said Mr. Price was bluffing." Marcia turned on him, and I saw the desperation starting to crack through her composure. "He built an illegal obstacle. This is his fault." But Stanley was already shaking his head, backing away. "No, no, I saw the email. He warned us, and you drove through anyway." The ambulance arrived first, lights flashing but no siren. 2 paramedics climbed out and hurried over. They checked Marcia for injuries, asked her questions, shone a light in her eyes. She was bruised from the seatbelt, shaken, but nothing broken. They offered to take her to the hospital for observation. She refused, signing a waiver with a trembling hand. 5 minutes later, Deputy Briggs pulled up in his patrol car, followed by a second unit. Deputy Briggs walked the scene methodically. He measured the distance from the first warning sign to the trench, 104 feet. He photographed the signs from multiple angles, zoomed in on the text. He looked into the trench, examined the damage to Marcia's vehicle, and took notes. Then he came over to Grandpa. "Mr. Price, can I see the email you sent to the HOA?" Grandpa pulled it up on his phone and handed it over. The deputy read it, scrolled through the attached photos, and nodded. "And the cameras?" Grandpa opened the camera app and showed him both feeds. The wide angle showed the entire approach, both signs clearly visible. Marcia's SUV driving through without slowing. The close-up showed her face through the windshield. Focused and intent, eyes forward. No confusion, no panic, just deliberate motion. Deputy Briggs watched the footage twice. "Can you send that to me?" he asked. Grandpa forwarded it immediately. The deputy walked over to Marcia, who was sitting on the back bumper of the ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders. "Miss Crowell, I need to ask you some questions. Did you see the warning signs?" Marcia looked up at him, and I could see her calculating. "I saw them," she said finally, "but I didn't think he was serious. I thought it was an intimidation tactic." Deputy Briggs wrote that down. "So you saw signs that said, 'Danger, trench ahead,' and you chose to drive through anyway?" Marcia's face flushed. "I had legal advice that this was a public road." The deputy closed his notebook. "Ma'am, whether or not you believe it's a public road doesn't change the fact that you ignored safety warnings on private property. Mr. Price posted clear signage, notified you in writing, and you drove through anyway. That's reckless driving at minimum, and trespassing." He pulled out his citation book. Marcia stood up, the blanket falling off her shoulders. "You're seriously giving me a ticket?" Her voice cracked. "I could have been killed." Deputy Briggs looked at her steadily. "You could have stopped. That's what the signs were for." He wrote out 2 citations: trespassing on private property, reckless driving, failure to heed warning signs. He handed them to her, and she stared at them like they were written in a foreign language. The second deputy called for a tow truck. Marcia's Mercedes would have to be pulled out with a winch, and even then, the damage to the undercarriage and front axle meant it wasn't going anywhere under its own power. As the deputies finished their reports, the crowd began to murmur. I heard bits of conversation. "She really just drove through the signs. I thought we had legal clearance." "This is insane." Norman Hale stepped forward, his voice carrying. "Marcia, I checked the county records like I said I would. There's no easement. There never was. You led us into this." Marcia turned to face him, and for the first time, I saw her mask fully crack. "I was trying to help the community," she said, but her voice was barely above a whisper. Stanley Brewer spoke up, louder than I'd ever heard him. "No, you were trying to win. And you dragged all of us into something illegal because you couldn't admit you were wrong." He looked around at the other HOA members. "I'm done. I'm not supporting this anymore." 2 other people nodded in agreement. One woman, maybe in her 40s, pulled out her phone. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. This needs to stop." Grandpa stood off to the side, saying nothing. He didn't gloat, didn't lecture. He just watched as the situation unraveled in front of him, the same way he'd watched Marcia drive through his warning signs. When Deputy Briggs came over to shake his hand, Grandpa accepted it quietly. "You did everything by the book, Mr. Price," the deputy said. "I'll include that in my report." Grandpa nodded. "I just wanted to protect my property." The tow truck took an hour to arrive and another 30 minutes to winch the Mercedes out of the trench. By the time it was loaded onto the flatbed, the crowd had mostly dispersed. Marcia sat in Norman's car, staring straight ahead, silent. Stanley and 2 other board members stood in a cluster near the gate, talking in low, serious voices. And Grandpa and I walked back to the house, the camera feed still recording, the evidence saved in triplicate. That evening, as the sun set and the ranch returned to its usual quiet, Grandpa sat on the porch with his binder open on his lap. He wrote the date, March 21st, Violation 4. Subject drove through posted warnings into marked trench. Deputies responded. Citations issued. Video evidence secured. Witnesses present. He closed the binder and set it on the table beside him. "Is it over?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, looking out toward the gate where the warning sign still stood, bright orange in the fading light. "Not yet," he said, "but it will be." The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, 5 days after the accident. Grandpa received a formal invitation via email from Stanley Brewer, who'd apparently taken over as interim board secretary. The subject line read, "Community discussion regarding recent events." Grandpa forwarded it to me, and I took the afternoon off work to drive down. This was something I wanted to see. The community center was packed, every chair was filled, and people lined the walls. I counted at least 40 residents, triple the usual attendance. The energy in the room was tense, uncertain. Norman Hale sat in the front row. Stanley was at the head table with 2 other board members, but Marcia's seat was conspicuously empty. A woman I didn't recognize called the meeting to order. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to acknowledge that we've invited Mr. Rowan Price to attend tonight. He's not a member of our HOA, but given the circumstances, we felt it was appropriate." Grandpa nodded from his seat in the 3rd row. A few people turned to look at him. Most looked embarrassed. Stanley stood up, a laptop open in front of him. "I think we all know why we're here," he said. His voice was steadier than I'd heard it before. "For the past month, our board, led by President Crowell, has been pursuing a claim that Mr. Price's private road constitutes a historic public right-of-way. We were told by our attorney that we had a legitimate legal basis. Based on that advice, several of us entered Mr. Price's property without permission, including a formal survey and what we called an inspection ride." He paused, looking around the room. "But I checked the county records myself this week. There is no easement. There is no record of public use. There never was." A murmur went through the crowd. Someone in the back called out, "So Marcia lied to us." Stanley shook his head. "I don't think she lied. I think she believed what she wanted to believe. And when Mr. Price showed her evidence to the contrary, she doubled down instead of admitting she was wrong." He clicked his laptop, and an image appeared on the projector screen. It was the email Grandpa had sent, complete with photos of the trench, the warning signs, and the utility clearance documents. "Mr. Price sent this to our entire board 4 days before the accident. He documented everything. He warned us explicitly, and President Crowell drove through anyway." Norman Hale raised his hand and was recognized. "I've known Rowan Price for 15 years. He's not a man who acts out of spite. He gave us every opportunity to stop. And speaking as someone who was part of that inspection ride, I'm ashamed I didn't question things sooner." His voice was rough with emotion. "We trespassed, repeatedly, and we did it because we trusted someone who was more interested in control than in being right." And the woman at the head table, who I later learned was named Patricia Henson, spoke next. "As of this afternoon, Marcia Crowell has resigned as HOA president. She submitted her letter via email and has not responded to requests for further comment." A ripple of reaction went through the room. Patricia continued, "The board has also terminated our contract with the attorney who advised us on this matter. It's become clear that we were given information that was, at best, incomplete." Stanley pulled up another document on the screen. "This is the invoice from our attorney. We've spent $11,000 in legal fees pursuing this easement claim. That money came from HOA dues, money that should have gone to maintaining our pool, our landscaping, our common areas." The number hung in the air. People shifted in their seats. Someone muttered a curse. "Furthermore," Stanley continued, "Marcia's vehicle sustained approximately $8,000 in damage. Her insurance has denied the claim because she ignored posted safety warnings, and she's received 2 citations from the sheriff's department, trespassing and reckless driving. If convicted, those carry fines of up to $700 combined, plus potential probation." Patricia looked toward Grandpa. "Mr. Price, I want to apologize on behalf of our community. What happened to you was wrong. We violated your property rights, repeatedly, and we caused you significant stress and expense. Is there anything we can do to make this right?" The room went quiet. Grandpa stood slowly. He didn't walk to the front. He just spoke from where he was, his voice calm and clear. "I appreciate the apology," he said. "All I ever wanted was for my boundary to be respected. I didn't want money. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to be left alone on land that's been in my family for 60 years. He paused, And I could see people actually listening, not just waiting for their turn to talk. What happened with Miss Crowell didn't happen because I was trying to hurt her. It happened because she refused to acknowledge a simple truth. That land is mine. The law is clear, and no amount of wanting something to be different changes that. He looked around the room. If you want to make it right, just respect the boundary going forward. That's all I ask. Norman stood up. I move that we formally acknowledge Mr. Price's property rights and commit, as a community, to never again enter his land without explicit written permission. The motion was seconded immediately. The vote was unanimous. Patricia wrote it into the official minutes while the room watched. Mr. Price, she said, we'll send you a certified copy of this resolution. And again, we're deeply sorry. After the meeting, several residents approached Grandpa to shake his hand or apologize individually. One older man, close to Grandpa's age, said something that stuck with me. You taught us something important tonight, that being loud doesn't make you right, and that boundaries matter, whether they're property lines or principles. Grandpa just nodded, gracious and humble as always. Stanley walked us out to the parking lot. Mr. Price, I should have spoken up sooner. I knew something felt wrong, but I went along because, well, Marcia was convincing, and I was a coward. Grandpa shook his hand. You spoke up when it mattered. That takes courage, too. Stanley looked relieved, like he'd been carrying a weight he could finally set down. What happens to Marcia now? I asked. Stanley glanced back at the community center. She's putting her house on the market. I don't think she can stay here after this. Too many people feel betrayed. And with the legal fees, the car damage, the citations, she's facing real consequences. On the drive home, Grandpa was quiet. When we pulled up to the ranch, the gate was closed, the warning signs still standing like sentries in the distance. You won, I said. He turned off the truck and sat there for a moment. It wasn't about winning, he said finally. It was about standing firm when someone tried to take something that wasn't theirs. The law did the rest. He climbed out and walked toward the house, and I followed. Inside, he opened his binder one last time. March 26th, HOA issued formal apology and resolution. Marcia Crowell resigned. Boundary dispute resolved. He closed the binder and put it on the shelf. Now, he said, it's over. 6 months later, I drove down to the ranch on a Saturday morning in late September. The summer heat had broken, and the air carried that first hint of autumn coolness. As I turned onto the property, I noticed the trench was gone. Grandpa had filled it in about a month after the accident. Once it was clear no one would be challenging his boundary anymore. The dirt road was smooth again, grass starting to grow over the scar. But the warning signs remained, weathered now, but still legible. A reminder. Grandpa was in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants. He looked up when he heard my car and waved. We worked together for a while in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from not needing to fill every moment with words. Finally, he sat back on his heels and pulled off his work gloves. Got something to show you, he said. We walked to the barn, and he pointed to a wooden frame mounted near the door. Inside was a document, officially embossed, behind glass, certificate of boundary confirmation, issued by the county. It certified the exact property lines of his land, signed by the county surveyor, and filed in the permanent records. Came in the mail last week, Grandpa said. I requested it after everything's settled. Wanted it official, not just for me, but for whoever owns this place after I'm gone. He ran his hand along the frame. Boundaries aren't just lines on a map. They're agreements between neighbors, between people, between what's yours and what's mine. And they only work when everyone respects them. I thought about Marcia, about how she'd convinced herself that wanting something badly enough made it hers. And I thought about how Grandpa had stood firm, not with anger or violence, but with patience and proof. We walked back to the house, and I noticed a car pulling up the drive. Norman Hale climbed out, carrying a pie wrapped in foil. Apple, he said when he reached the porch. Helen made it this morning. Figured we owed you about 1,000 of these. Grandpa laughed and invited him in. Over coffee. Norman filled us in on the changes at Meadowbrook Estates. Stanley Brewer had been elected the new HOA president. The first thing he did was implement a new policy requiring board approval and legal verification before any property disputes could be pursued. "We learned our lesson," Norman said. "The expensive way." He also mentioned that Marcia's house had sold a month ago. She'd moved out of state, somewhere in Arizona. No forwarding address, no goodbye to anyone. "Some people can't handle being wrong," Norman said quietly. "It eats at them until they can't stay in the same place where everyone knows what happened." Grandpa didn't say anything to that. He just nodded. And I could see he felt no satisfaction in her leaving, just a quiet sadness that it had come to that. After Norman left, the afternoon drifted into evening. Grandpa made sandwiches, and we ate on the porch, watching the sun drop toward the horizon. That's when I saw another vehicle coming up the road, an old pickup I didn't recognize. A woman in her 30s climbed out, holding the hand of a small boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. "Mr. Price," she called. "I'm Sarah Chen. I bought the house 3 doors down from the HOA development." I heard about what happened, and I wanted to introduce myself. "This is my son, Oliver." Grandpa stood and shook her hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Sarah smiled, but there was something serious behind it. "I wanted to thank you, actually. When I was looking at properties, someone at the title company told me about your boundary dispute, how you stood your ground, documented everything, followed the law. It made me realize I needed to do the same kind of due diligence. Turns out the property I almost bought had an easement issue that wasn't disclosed. Your case probably saved me from a lawsuit." She knelt down next to her son. "Oliver, you see Mr. Price's fence there, and that gate?" The boy nodded. "That's his property line. It means his land stops there, and everyone else's starts on the other side. And the most important thing is respecting that line, not crossing it without permission, understanding that what's someone else's isn't yours." Oliver looked up at Grandpa with wide eyes. "Even if you really want it?" he asked. Grandpa smiled. "Especially then." After Sarah and Oliver left, I asked Grandpa if he ever regretted how he'd handled things, if he wished he'd just let Marcia use the road, avoided the whole mess. He thought about it for a long time, watching the last light fade from the sky. "No," he said finally, "because it wasn't just about the road. It was about the principle. If I'd given in, what would I have taught people? That boundaries are negotiable if you push hard enough, that the law doesn't matter if you're persistent." He stood and leaned against the porch rail. "Every person has a gate in their life, something that's theirs, that they need to protect. Maybe it's their time, maybe it's their dignity, maybe it's their right to say no. And when someone tries to drive through that gate without asking, you have 2 choices. You can let them and lose a piece of yourself, or you can stand firm and show them that some lines aren't meant to be crossed." The stars were coming out now, sharp and clear in the country darkness. I thought about all the people who'd been touched by this story. Stanley, who'd found the courage to speak truth. Norman, who'd learned to verify before trusting. The HOA community, who'd discovered that good intentions don't excuse bad actions. And even Marcia, wherever she was now, who'd learned that power without respect is just tyranny in disguise. "You know what I'm proudest of," Grandpa said. "That I did it right. I didn't threaten anyone, didn't destroy property, didn't break the law. I just used the tools I had. Documentation, truth, patience. And the law did what it was supposed to do. Protected the person who was right." He turned to look at me. "That's what I want people to remember. Not that I won some fight, but that the system works, if you're willing to work it. That boundaries matter. And that standing up for what's yours doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong." A few weeks later, I got a call from Grandpa. His voice had an unfamiliar lightness to it. "Guess what came today? A letter from the State Bar Association. Someone reported the HOA's attorney for providing negligent advice. He's being investigated. Might lose his license." I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, not because someone was being punished, but because the system was still working, still holding people accountable. The last time I visited the ranch that year was in December. Snow had dusted the fields, rare for that part of Texas. Grandpa and I walked the property line together, following the fence from corner to corner. When we reached the gate, he stopped and put his hand on the cold metal. 60 years my family has held this land," he said. 3 generations, and it'll be here for more. because we knew how to defend it, not with guns or fists, with patience and proof and principle. He looked at me, and I saw in his eyes something I hope I carry forward. The understanding that some battles are worth fighting, not because you want to hurt anyone, but because some lines, once crossed, can never be redrawn. That a boundary isn't a wall meant to keep the world out. It's a definition of who you are and what you stand for. And when someone tries to erase that line, standing firm isn't aggression, it's survival. As we walked back to the house, I thought about everyone who'd ever felt powerless in the face of someone else's entitlement, everyone who'd been told they were wrong when they knew they were right, everyone who'd stood at their own gate, wondering if defending it was worth the cost. And I hoped they'd hear this story and know that yes, it is. Because in the end, Grandpa didn't just protect 40 acres of Texas dirt. He protected something bigger. The idea that boundaries matter, that truth matters, and that one person, standing firm in what's right, can hold the line against any force that tries to cross it. Grandpa Rowan didn't need revenge. He just needed the truth, patience, and a boundary worth defending. If this story reminded you that standing firm isn't the same as standing alone, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below telling me about a time you had to protect your own boundary, or share this with someone who needs to hear that doing things right still matters. And if you want more stories where justice wins without throwing a single punch, subscribe to Karma Fence, because some